Alright guys, so now we're going to go ahead and pick up the rest of the questions, 11 through 18. With 11, I'm going to go ahead and use an extra sheet of paper just because of how much work we're going to do on this one. So problem number 11. 11 says that it goes through -5, -9, and -10, -12. Hint is to find the slope first. So again, our notes or our instructions are still the same. Put this equation in the slope-intercept form. If we can put it in the slope-intercept form, then we're done. Now with this one, again, we kind of went from easy to now we have the toughest one. We had easy, then medium, and now this is the toughest one. So your hint here is to find your slope first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, write this on a separate sheet of paper. So we have the points -5, -9, and the point -10, -12. Oh, sorry, +5. Okay, so hint is to find slope first. With this one, I'm going to go ahead and use a table again, x's and y's. First point 5, 9, 5, -9. Next point, -10, -12. Okay, we want to find our deltas. This one's going to be -3. This one's going to be -15. Okay, again, I kind of skipped a step just because I've already kind of shown you guys how to find your differences. So we do bottom minus top, gives you -3. Bottom minus top gives you -15. Okay, then we do delta y over delta x. This is going to give me -3 on top, -15 on the bottom, and I type that into my calculator. Which gives me positive 1/5. So my slope here is 1/5. Alright, now I'm not done. That was just my hint to do that first. Now, if I put all my information together, I have my slope, I have 2 points. Okay? Now with this, now that we're at this step, it pretty much looks like the one that we just previously did where we had slope and we had a point, and we can actually solve this one the same way by plugging in our values, going in and solving for b. However, we are kind of spoiled here. We have 2 points. Really what you have to do is you just have to choose one. It doesn't matter which one. They both will give you the same answer, but you just have to go in and you have to choose 1 point. Usually if I have 2 positive values or a positive point, that's the one that I choose. In this case, I don't really have that, but I'll go with the next best thing. Usually the negatives are where students make mistakes, so I try to avoid the negatives when I can. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this point here, 5, -9 instead. I'm going to go ahead and choose my slope and my point. I'm going to go ahead and use both of those and solve my equation. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite them back over here. M equals 1/5, and then my point 5, -9. Okay, once again, just like before, I can label my point x and y. Again, with our equation, we're going to use y equals mx plus b. And then I just plug in my values where they go. Once again, my slope or my m goes in for m. My 5 or my x value goes in for x, and then my y or -9 goes in for y. Okay, I rewrite my equation. Now I have -9 is equal to 1/5 parentheses 5 plus b. Okay, so that's what my equation turns into. Okay, now we're going to solve. When we solve problems like this, it's always 2 steps. Again, when we solve here in high school, we draw that line down our equal sign, helping us distinguish which side of the equal sign we're on. Okay, now in middle school, you should have learned that parentheses come first, so we do 1/5 times 5. Again, you can do on your calculator. One-fifth times 5, which is going to give me 1. So this simplified is going to give me 1. Again, I always try to use as much space as I can. That plus b we didn't touch. That one's going to come down. And the plus or the minus sign we didn't touch. So that one also comes down. Again, you want to try to keep everything nice and lined up so that you're not making any mistakes. Again, our end goal, the reason that we're doing this, we're trying to figure out what b is. So what I do is I box in my b. Again, that tells me that I'm not going to touch it. That's going to stay there. Everything else is going to have to move. Again, it helps some students if you go in and you cover that up. And now what you're asking yourself is, how do I get rid of this 1 and get it over to the other side? So that 1, opposite of positive 1 in this case, is going to be negative 1. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. And positive 1, negative 1, that's going to cancel out. The b is going to come down. So we have b equals, and then it's just whatever this value is over here. Which again, calculator. Negative 9 plus negative 1. I always do plus. Of course, negative 9 minus 1 also works. But you just can't do minus, minus, minus. In this case, we get negative 10. So there is my solution. B is negative 10. Now, when we plug this back in, when we're solving this all back down, again, our end goal was to get our equation into y equals mx plus b, right? So really, all I have to do is just plug in my m and plug in my b. X and y this time stay x and y. You don't have to plug in the points back in. You don't have to plug in 5 and negative 9 back in. It's just going to stay x, y. So my final equation is going to be y equals my m, which we already knew was 1/5, x, and then plus my b. In this case, my b in this case is negative 10, so minus 10. All right, so that's my solution. All right, now we can jump over to the last page. And we have more solving. Okay, for questions 2 through 14, or 12 through 14, it says write the equation in slope-intercept form. So, again, slope-intercept form we'll review is y equals mx plus b. So, do we know how to solve? Do we know how to do, 1 or 2 steps to solve these types of equations? So, we're going to go in and solve now. So you draw your line down your equal sign. The first step when you're solving, usually we read this like a sentence left to right, but in this case, since we have that negative 1/4 and we have these parentheses here, we have to do the parentheses first. So we distribute. We're going to distribute that 1/4 twice, or the negative 1/4, sorry. So negative 1/4 times x is going to give me, anytime you do a number and a letter, you just stick them together. So this just gives me negative 1/4 x. For the next one, we have negative 1/4 times, and this is the one where students make a lot of mistakes, that sign sticks to that number. So when we multiply that second number, it needs to be not just 12, but in this case, negative 12. So negative 1/4 times negative 12. All right, so negative 1/4 times negative 12, which gives me positive 3. Equals, again, since I didn't touch this, this comes down. Right, so my function now is y minus 4 is equal to negative 1/4 x plus 3. Now, our end goal, once again, is to get y equals mx plus b. Really what you notice with these types of equations, if you can get the y by itself on the left side, the right side of this equation pretty much just kind of works itself out. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say the variable that I need to solve for in this case is going to be y. So if I cover up my y, again, because the y is going to stay on that side, I just have to figure out how do I get rid of minus 4 on this side. The answer to that is going to be the opposite thing, which is going to be plus 4. On this side, I have 2 different options to put it under. I can put it under the negative 1/4 x or the 3. And basically what you just have to ask yourself is the number that I'm moving, does that have an x on it, or is it just a regular number? In this case, it's a regular number, so it's going to go under the 3. So I have to put plus 4 there. That's going to cancel out. My y comes down, so we have y equals. And now we can go in and finally solve the end of our equation. The negative 1/4 x we didn't do anything with. I'm just going to bring that down. And then the 3 plus 4 is going to be plus 7. And I'm done. All right, next one. And all of these kind of, you just kind of get a few steps. In fact, I'm only going to do 13. I'm going to leave you guys with 14. That one you should be able to distribute and solve on your own. Again, I'll show you guys the steps again. We draw our line down our equal sign. We're going to solve. It's 2 steps to solve. We distribute, and then we move one number over. So first step is to distribute. So we're going to do 3 times x, which is going to give me 3x. Then we're going to do 3 times, again, we just talked about this, has to be, the sign sticks to it, -2. So 3 times -2. It's going to give me -6. And then both of these come down. All right, so we have y plus 12 equals 3x minus 6. Again, and then just like before we talked about, if you can leave your y on this side and move everything else over, it kind of solves itself. So I always box in my y, put my finger over it. How do I get rid of plus 12? This answer here is going to be minus 12. That goes away, my y comes down. So now we have y equals 3x comes down. And then you just simply add those 2 numbers there together, which again would be -6 plus -12, which gives me -8. Then that's my solution. I'll leave 14 for you guys to work, just so that way you can kind of go in, look at the steps that we did here, solve it on your own. All right, 15 says, Movers Inc. is a company that helps move furniture. The company charges $55 for 6 hours and $37.50 for 3 hours. If the rate for Movers Inc. can be modeled by the linear function, modeled by a linear function, which equation best describes the total cost y after x hours worked? So basically this is just telling me, can you read this situation? Can you come up with an equation? Right, so again, if we read that again, it says the company charges $55 for 6 hours and $37 for 3 hours. Now, this isn't one of those like, you know, charges such and such per hour plus some initial fee, right? So we can't solve it that way. Instead, we kind of have to go back to the other unit, which means that we have to go in and we have to set up a proportion. Okay, so this one says $55 for 6 hours of work, and then $37.50 for 3 hours of work. And I'm supposed to come up with an equation. The best way to do that is to set up our table. Now, before I go in and I just put 55.6 and then 37.50, we have to make sure that we're doing this the right way. So in this case, it's dealing with hours, and I don't know how much we've really kind of talked about this up to this point in Algebra 1, but hours or time in this case deals with your independent variable. And what that means is, since it's independent, it doesn't depend on anything, right? So time doesn't care if you're happy, sad, mad, you know, anything like that. Time is just time. It's going to keep going. No matter, you know, what's going on in your life, it keeps going at a certain rate. So we call that something that's independent. If you're earning money, usually it depends on how much time you're working or doing something, right? So the 55 or the money in this case would be your dependent. In algebra, independent and dependent have a certain letter. Independent is always going to be your x values. Dependents are always going to be your y values. So really these values here are flip-flopped. We need to flip those back. So here we have 6 hours, so 6 actually needs to go in the x, and the 55 needs to go in for your y. And then same thing, we have 3 hours for 37.50. Okay, so we can set up our proportions this way, and then we would go in and we would find our equation. Delta, delta. So we do delta y over delta x. So 6 to 3, well, that's going to be minus 3. And then 55 to 37.50. Bottom minus top, 37.5 minus 55. 17.5. Right, so I have my delta x and my delta y. Then we go in and we do delta y over delta x. My delta y was, negative 17. Negative 17.5 over negative 3. Which gives me 5.833 repeating. I can go over to math. I can hit fraction. And your math key is right here. Anytime you get a fraction or a decimal, you hit math, fraction, and all you do is just hit enter, and it's going to give you the fraction 35 over 6. Okay, so not a very nice fraction, but there it is, 35 over 6. Again, we're trying to figure out our equation, so 35 over 6. So far we have that that's our slope. M equals 35 over 6. And then we want to find our y-intercept, our b. Again, to do that, it's just like the previous problems that we did. For example, like number 11, we go in and we have to solve that. So once again, I'm going to go to my green sheet of paper and I'm going to solve the rest of this. So again, I have my slope. And then I just choose one of these points. It doesn't matter which one. Since I don't, if you don't want to work with decimals, you don't have to. We can work with 655. All right, so we have that. Now we can go through and we can solve our equation. Again, we have y equals mx plus b. Plug them in where they go. 6 goes in for x, 55 goes in for y, 35 over 6 goes in there. So this becomes 55 equal to 35 over 6, parentheses 6 plus b. Okay, now we can go through and we can solve. 35 over 6 times 6, again we can do that on our calculator. That's going to give me 35. Okay, so this simplified gives you 35. Plus b comes down, plus 55 comes down, or sorry, just 55 comes down. And now we want to solve for our b, we want to get the b by itself. So we box this in. Right, we're solving for b, we want the b to stay. So I want to cover that one up, and I basically just ask myself, what's the opposite of 35? In this case, it's minus 35. 55 minus 35 is going to give me 20. Is equal to b. So I know my slope, which was 35 over 6. I know my y-intercept, 20. So now I have my full equation, y equals 35 over 6x plus 20. All right, so that's my equation. You can, of course, double check this. For example, if I go back up here, if I go back up to my 2 points, oops, sorry, I didn't include the point 50 in there. If I go back and I check my 2 points, my equation should give me those 2 points. So the equation that I got was 35 over 6 x plus 20. Now if I go to my table, I should be able to find those values. So at 3, I should have 37.5 or 0.50, which shows up as 75 over 2, which I'll go ahead and check here in a little bit. And then for 6, I should have 55. And there it shows up, 655. All right, so my points do show up. Again, I have to go in and verify that 75 divided by 2 is in fact 37.5. Again, very easily I can go over here. Was it 70? 75. 75 divided by 2 does in fact give me that 37.5, which I had originally right there. All right, so both of those points show up, so that means that this equation is in fact correct. All right, we can then move on to these bottom ones. Number 16. Number 16 says write the slope, the y-intercept, and then the equation of each line. So this is something that, again, you guys should have done in 8th grade. This is something that should be hopefully familiar to you. Some of these will give you points. Most of the time they won't, so we have to kind of go in and find our own points. So I see 1 point there, and I see 1 point here. All right, so we go in, find our points, and then we can go in and solve. The easiest thing I think always to start with is your b. B is your y-intercept, here is your y-axis. So we're looking at where this line that's going up and down crosses that line right there. So that's going to be right there. So that's going to be at 0, -2. My m is going to be rise over run, again because we have a graph. rise over run. So I always encourage my students to start on the bottom point. So we start on the bottom, work our way up. That's going to be up 2 units. And then we're going to go over to the left 2 units. I also encourage my students to always do arrows. That kind of helps you keep track of which way you're going. And then later you can kind of go in with your arrows and figure out, was it positive, was it negative. So rise, again, controls up and down. Obviously, rise is pretty easy. If you go up, that's positive. If you go down, that's negative. So if I kind of start simplifying this, 2 up, it's going to be positive. And then to the left, left 2 is going to be negative 2. So then I type that into my calculator.
Why do you look like that?
I'm filming the thing. And so then my slope then is negative 1. My equation together then is going to be y equals negative 1x
Okay, you have way
minus
too much
2.
fun with this. With this math stuff. I walk in, you're like giggling to yourself. I'm like, oh Lord, what is he doing? No, it's just my slope.
Well,
I know, it's stupid.
alright, and then you guys have those other 2. I'll let you guys do those other 2 graphs on your own. Again, it's just simply rise over run, something that you guys should already know how to do. Alright, and then we'll do questions 17 and 18. Alright, so 17 says, give 3 points that the line y minus 7 equals negative 3 over 2, parentheses x minus 1 passes through. So really this one is all just kind of calculator work. If you're clever about it, you can actually get this done without too much work. So really it wants me to give 3 points, which again you would find your points if you went into y equals, you would go second graph, and that's how you pull up your points, right? So in order to do something like that, you would, really our end goal is to get the y by itself. If we can get our equation into y equals something, you can type that something into your calculator and it'll give you that equation. So of course we talked about you can go in, you can distribute, you can solve this the whole way, or if we just simply say I want to get the y by itself, right? The only thing stopping me right now is that minus 7, so I can do the opposite, which is plus 7. Right, so on both sides I'm going to go through and I'm going to add 7 to both sides. Now this side over here, the left side, is pretty easy. That's just going to go away. We have y equals. Then on this side, it's not too bad. Yes, that can kind of get a little bit messy, but we're not going to distribute. We're not going to do anything like that. Again, we're trying to solve this as effortlessly as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this whole first part of the equation. I'm going to bring that down. So that's going to be negative 3 over 2, parentheses x minus 1. And then plus 7, I'm just going to tack it on at the end, plus 7. Okay, now that isn't solved all the way, but that's okay because our calculator can actually do that on its own. So we can go to y equals, we can actually type this in exactly how we have it now. Even though it's not solved, our calculator will go in and it'll solve it for us. So I can do alpha y equals negative 3 over 2, parentheses x minus 1, and then plus 7. Right, so all I did was just do plus 7 on both sides. That's really the only algebra that we're doing here. From here, I can go into my table, and then I can give them their 3 points that they wanted. Right, so I can go ahead and make myself a little table over here, x, y, and I can give them 3 points. Again, if you want to pick good points, you just pick whole numbers. Here, just because my graph starts at negative 1, I'm going to choose that one. So negative 1, 10, 1, 7, and 3, 4 would be my points. Right, pretty straightforward. Same thing with this one. It says given the equation y equals or y minus 15 equals 1/5 parentheses x minus 2. Same thing, I can go and draw my line down my equal sign. Same exact steps. If I want to just type this into my calculator, do as little work as I can can just box that in. Really the only thing stopping me from having y equals is that minus 15. And so I do the opposite to move it to the other side. So plus 15 to both sides. This goes away. My y comes down, so now I have y equals, again, we're going to go ahead and bring that first part, or this right-hand part of the equation, we're going to bring that down. So we have 1/5 x minus 2, and then I have that plus 15 that I just tack on at the end. Again, I just go into my calculator. Alpha y equals enter, 1/5, parentheses, x minus 2, plus 15. So I have this equation here, and then I can go in and I can fill in whatever part of the table they want me to fill in. I'm going to go ahead and stop here because, of course, you guys can go in on your own, fill in your own table if you need to. So negative 48, for example, is 5. All right, so pretty easy to fill in the table from here. Again, we did very, very little math, very, very little work. It's just a matter of identifying, hey, if I can get the y by itself, I can type this into my calculator, and if I can type that into my calculator, then I'm pretty much done. Right, so very, very little math involved for something like this. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead and leave you guys here. You guys should have all the information you need to solve all the rest of your problems, and of course I left you guys a little bit of homework, the other two from question 16 and then problem number 14 on your own. Alright, so I hope you guys have a good day and good luck studying, good luck on your test.